Prelude to Battle, June 1944. Morning light illuminated Toi anchorage on June 13, 1944, as the Imperial Japanese Navy assembled for what would become one of the Pacific War's most decisive engagements. Among the warships gathered in this remote Philippine anchorage, aircraft carrier Shōkaku represented Japanese naval power at its finest. Her flight deck, stretching nearly 850 feet, had launched planes that struck Pearl Harbor 30 months earlier. Now she prepared for her final voyage, though neither her 1,663 crew members nor their commanders could foresee the submarine waiting to seal her fate. 6 days later, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa observed from his flagship bridge as the first mobile fleet's combined elements began departure. The formation was impressive by any standard. 3 fleet carriers, including Shōkaku and her sister ships Zuikaku and Taiho, accompanied by heavy cruisers Atago, Takao, Maya, and Chokai, with 13 destroyers forming a protective screen. This represented Japan's last great carrier power concentration in the Pacific, a force that once dominated the ocean from Hawaii to the Indian Ocean. The fleet's departure from Toi was no routine sortie. It represented Japan's desperate gamble to reverse war's tide, which had turned decisively against them since Midway. As anchor chains rattled through hawse holes and great vessels began moving, thousands of sailors stood at their posts, unaware that within a week, over 1,200 would perish in the Philippine Sea's warm waters. Their destination, the Mariana Islands, where American forces had begun assaulting Saipan. Their mission, nothing less than destroying the U.S. Pacific Fleet's carrier force. Japan's desperate strategic situation. The strategic situation facing Japan in mid-1944 was catastrophic. The empire that had expanded so rapidly in 1941 to 42 was now contracting under relentless American pressure. Loss of the Gilbert Islands, neutralization of Truk, and now the American Marianas invasion represented more than territorial losses. They signaled the Pacific War's approaching endgame. Saipan held special significance. Its capture would place American B-29 Superfortress bombers within range of Tokyo itself, bringing war directly to the Japanese homeland for the first time since the Doolittle Raid. Admiral Somu Toyoda, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, understood the gravity perfectly. Marianas' loss would sever Japan's communications with resource-rich southern territories and expose home islands to devastating strategic bombing. In response, he authorized Operation Ago, a complex plan leveraging Japan's remaining advantages: longer-range carrier aircraft, land-based aviation support from island airfields, and superior battleship gunnery training in night combat. Yet, the Japanese Navy of 1944 bore little resemblance to the force that had stunned the world at Pearl Harbor. Experienced pilot attrition was perhaps the most critical weakness. Veterans who had executed precision attacks at Pearl Harbor, Darwin, and Colombo were mostly dead, victims of grinding battles at Midway, the Solomons, and Santa Cruz Islands. Their replacements, rushed through abbreviated training, possessed neither skill nor experience. Many pilots aboard Shōkaku and her sisters had fewer than 200 flying hours compared to American counterparts' 800-plus hours. The fuel situation presented another critical vulnerability. Japan's merchant marine, systematically hunted by American submarines, could no longer reliably transport refined fuel from the East Indies to home islands. The mobile fleet operated on unrefined Terracan crude oil pumped directly from Borneo wells into ships' bunkers. This heavy, sulfurous petroleum produced thick black smoke, clogged boilers, and reduced maximum speed. Engine room crews worked in hellish conditions as crude oil released toxic fumes, making extended below-deck operations nearly unbearable. The submarine picket line, Admiral Charles Lockwood, commanding the Pacific Submarine Force, had studied Japanese naval patterns and correctly anticipated that any relief force would pass through the Philippine Sea. He positioned submarines in a scouting line, creating what he called the NA Line, a series of patrol zones serving as an early warning system. For submarines, Albacore, Bang, Finback, and Stingray were positioned at precise coordinates, forming a net through which the Japanese fleet would likely pass. What Lockwood didn't anticipate was that another submarine, not originally part of his carefully planned deployment, would achieve one of submarine warfare's most significant victories. USS Cavalla, on her maiden war patrol, was about to intersect with destiny. USS Cavalla, American submarine technology. USS Cavalla, SS-244, represented American submarine design's pinnacle in 1944. Built at Electric Boat Company's Groton, Connecticut shipyard, she was a Gatto-class fleet submarine, one of 77 boats of her class serving as the U.S. submarine forces' backbone throughout the war. Laid down March 4, 1943, and launched November 14 that same year, Cavalla was commissioned February 29, 1944, under command of Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kossler, a 36-year-old career naval officer from Ohio who had graduated from the Naval Academy. At 311 feet, 9 inches in length, and displacing 1,526 tons surfaced, Cavalla was a formidable weapon. Her pressure hull, constructed of high-tensile steel, could withstand depths up to 400 feet, though her test depth was listed at 300 feet. Powered by 4 Fairbanks Morse diesel engines generating 5,400 horsepower surfaced and 4 General Electric motors producing 2,740 horsepower submerged, she could achieve 20.25 knots surfaced and 8.75 knots submerged. Her range was equally impressive. 11,000 nautical miles surfaced at 10 knots, though reduced to 48 hours at 2 knots when operating on battery power underwater. The submarine's primary armament consisted of 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, with storage for 24 Mark 14 or Mark 18 torpedoes. Each Mark 14 torpedo was 20 feet, 6 inches long, weighed 3,280 pounds, and carried a 643-pound Torpex warhead capable of breaking all but the most heavily armored warships' backs. The troubled history of the Mark 14, with its defective magnetic exploder and tendency to run deeper than set, had largely been resolved by 1944, making Cavalla's torpedoes far more reliable than those used earlier in the war. Cavalla's crew of 72 officers and enlisted men had spent 3 months in intensive training before departing on their first war patrol. The submarine community was unique within the Navy. Officers and enlisted men lived and worked in extraordinarily close quarters, creating interdependence unknown in the surface fleet. The boat's technology represented submarine warfare's cutting edge. Her SJ surface search radar could detect enemy vessels at ranges up to 12 miles in good conditions, while SD air search radar provided approaching aircraft warning. Below the waterline, JK sound gear enabled acoustic target tracking. The torpedo data computer, TDC, an electromechanical analog computer, calculated firing solutions by integrating target bearing, range, speed, and course with the submarine's own movement. First War Patrol. Cavalla's journey to her appointment with history began June 4, 1944, when she departed Midway Island for her maiden war patrol. The boat had arrived at Pearl Harbor in mid-May after a 5,000-mile journey from Connecticut via the Panama Canal, then proceeded to Midway for final preparations. The submarine's assigned patrol area encompassed waters east of the Philippines, specifically approaches to San Bernardino Strait and Surigao Strait, 2 primary passages through the Philippine archipelago. These strategic waterways served as highways for Japanese naval and merchant traffic moving between home islands and resource-rich Netherlands East Indies territories. Kossler's orders: interdict enemy shipping, gather intelligence on Japanese naval movements, and serve as a scout for larger American operations unfolding to the east. The first patrol days proved uneventful as Cavalla moved westward across the Pacific's vast expanse. The crew settled into submarine operations' monotonous routine: 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off, with off-duty time split between sleeping, eating, and maintaining the boat's complex machinery. On June 8th, while transiting waters near Marcus Island, approximately 1,200 miles southeast of Tokyo, Cavalla experienced her first unusual incident. The officer of the deck reported a sudden jolt and vibration from the stern, followed by what appeared to be blood in the boat's wake. Kossler ordered all stop and sent men to inspect propellers and stern planes. Finding no damage, he concluded they had struck a small whale, one of many inhabiting these waters. The storm. Weather began deteriorating June 14th as Cavalla approached her assigned patrol area. Barometric pressure dropped steadily, and seas built to 15 feet, sending solid water over the bridge and down the conning tower hatch. The boat pitched and rolled violently, making normal operations nearly impossible. After fighting the typhoon for 18 hours, Kossler ordered the boat, submerged, to ride out the storm in relative calm below the surface. As the storm passed June 15th, Cavalla surfaced to find clearing skies and moderating seas. Almost immediately, the radio operator intercepted a contact report from USS Flying Fish, another submarine operating nearby. Flying Fish had spotted a Japanese task force moving east at high speed, but had been unable to gain attack position. The sighting electrified Cavalla's crew. Major Japanese fleet units had been scarce since 1942 battles, and the opportunity to engage capital ships was exactly what every submarine commander dreamed of. Kossler immediately ordered a course change to intercept the reported contact and increased speed to 17 knots, pushing diesels hard despite still rough seas. The hunt begins. Throughout the night of June 15th to 16th, lookouts strained their eyes searching for distinctive Japanese warship silhouettes, while the radar operator continuously swept the SJ scope for electronic contacts. Dawn on June 16th brought disappointment. Despite covering over 200 miles during the night search, neither submarine had found the Japanese task force. Kossler reluctantly concluded the enemy had either changed course or increased speed beyond his calculations. Just before midnight June 16th, the SJ radar detected multiple contacts to the southwest. The operator reported what appeared to be 5 or 6 vessels moving at moderate speed. This looked like a convoy, 2 large contacts that could be tankers or cargo ships escorted by 3 or 4 smaller vessels. The attack approach proved frustrating. Japanese escorts were alert and aggressive, constantly pinging with active sonar and making random course changes. After 3 hours of cat-and-mouse maneuvering, a destroyer charged directly at Cavalla's position. Kossler ordered emergency dive to 300 feet, rigged for silent running, and waited as the escort passed overhead. What Kossler didn't know, the convoy he'd been pursuing consisted of fleet oilers supporting Ozawa's mobile fleet. Had he successfully attacked these vessels, Japanese carriers would have been forced to curtail operations due to fuel shortage. The critical contact report. The afternoon of June 17th brought new orders from ComSubPac. Based on multiple submarine sightings and signals intelligence, Admiral Lockwood was repositioning boats to intercept what was clearly a major Japanese fleet movement. Cavalla was ordered to take position at 13 degrees 0 minutes north, 137 degrees 0 minutes east, approximately 350 miles west of Guam. At 1945 hours June 17th, as Cavalla raced toward her new position, the SJ radar operator reported a faint contact bearing 290 degrees, range 30,000 yards. As range decreased, more contacts appeared on the radar screen. By 2015 hours, Kossler had identified what could only be a major Japanese task force. Through careful plotting, Kossler identified what appeared to be at least 1 aircraft carrier, several possible battleships or heavy cruisers, and screening destroyers. The decision Kossler faced was one of submarine warfare's most difficult. His boat was in perfect position to attack. But Kossler also understood the strategic importance of his discovery. Admiral Spruance's fleet needed to know the location, composition, and course of this Japanese force. After brief consultation with his executive officer, Kossler made the harder choice. He would forego the attack and surface to transmit a contact report. At 21:45, after the Japanese force had passed beyond visual range, Cavalla surfaced into tropical darkness. The radio operator immediately began transmitting. Large enemy task force, latitude 13 degrees north, longitude 136 degrees 30 minutes east, base course 045, speed 19 knots, composition at least one carrier, several battleships or cruisers, multiple destroyers. The message was received at Pearl Harbor and immediately relayed to Admiral Spruance aboard USS Indianapolis. This was the first definitive report of the approaching Japanese carrier force. June 19th, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. At 0345 on June 19th, the quiet routine was shattered when a low-flying aircraft passed directly over the submarine. Cavalla crash-dived, her bow pointing sharply downward as ballast tanks flooded. After 30 minutes submerged, Kossler brought the boat back to periscope depth. As dawn broke on June 19th, 1944, Cavalla found herself in an extraordinarily fortuitous position. Unknown to Kossler, the complex movements of Japanese and American fleets had placed his submarine directly in the path of Ozawa's main carrier force. At 10:48, Cavalla's sound operator reported high-speed screws bearing 070 degrees. Kossler raised the periscope for a brief observation and immediately ordered it lowered. On the horizon, he had spotted pagoda-style masts characteristic of Japanese warships. He ordered battle stations submerged, and the crew rushed to combat positions with practiced efficiency. The perfect shot. At 10:52, Kossler made his second periscope observation. This time, the view took his breath away. A large aircraft carrier accompanied by at least one heavy cruiser and several destroyers was approaching from the northeast at approximately 20 knots. The carrier was recovering aircraft, with planes circling overhead waiting their turn to land. The flight deck was crowded with aircraft that had already recovered, their wings still extended. Kossler estimated range at 12,000 yards, too far for an effective torpedo attack, but the carrier's course would bring it much closer. The next 15 minutes required exceptional submarine handling. Kossler needed to maneuver Cavalla into optimal firing position without being detected by screening destroyers. The carrier was identified as a Shōkaku-class vessel based on its distinctive profile, the small island structure offset to starboard, the massive flight deck, and unique anti-aircraft gun arrangement. At 11:10, Kossler made what he intended to be his final observation before firing. The carrier, now positively identified as either Shōkaku or Zuikaku based on the pagoda mast and flight deck configuration, was at range of 5,000 yards and closing. The angle on the bow was nearly perfect for a broadside shot. At 11:18, with Shōkaku at range of 1,200 yards, Kossler made his decision. "Fire one," he commanded. The first torpedo left Cavalla's number 1 tube with characteristic shutter and high-pressure air discharge. At 8-second intervals, 5 more torpedoes followed, spreading in a fan pattern calculated to ensure hits regardless of any last-minute target course changes. Even as the 6th torpedo was leaving its tube, Kossler ordered, "Take her deep, flood negative, full dive on the bow planes." 3 hits. Cavalla's bow angled sharply downward as tons of water flooded into the negative tank. The submarine was passing 100 feet when the first explosion resonated through the water, a deep, satisfying boom that brought smiles to crew faces despite their precarious situation. 8 seconds later, a second explosion, then a third. Kossler had hoped for 4 hits, but 3 was an excellent result against a maneuvering target. Aboard Shōkaku, The first indication of danger came when a lookout spotted torpedo wakes approaching from starboard. The officer of the watch immediately ordered full right rudder and emergency speed, but it was too late. The first torpedo struck amidships at frame 145, tearing a massive hole in the hull and flooding number 3 boiler room. The second hit further forward, destroying aviation fuel bunkers and starting fires among aircraft parked on the hangar deck. The third torpedo struck near the forward elevator, causing it to jam in the raised position and rendering flight operations impossible. The carrier immediately took on a severe list to starboard as thousands of tons of water poured through gaping holes in her hull. The depth charge attack back aboard Cavalla celebration was short-lived. 2 minutes after firing, the first depth charges detonated above and behind the submarine. Japanese escorts had either detected the submarine's periscope or traced back torpedo wakes to their point of origin. Now began a deadly game of cat and mouse as Cavalla went deep and silent, trying to evade destroyers hunting her. The submarine passed 300 feet, approaching her test depth, as more depth charges exploded in patterns around her estimated position. The depth charge attack was methodical and relentless. Japanese destroyers worked in coordination, one maintaining sonar contact while the other made attack runs. Charges were set to detonate at varying depths, creating a three-dimensional kill zone. Cavalla had to somehow evade. At 11:35, a pattern of 6 charges detonated so close that cork insulation rained from the overhead. Light bulbs shattered, and the submarine's hull groaned under pressure waves. Kossler ordered silent running, shutting down all non-essential equipment to reduce noise signature. The crew removed their shoes, moving in stocking feet to minimize sound. Air conditioning was secured, and within minutes the temperature inside began rising toward unbearable levels. For the next 2 hours, Cavalla played a desperate evasion game. Kossler varied the submarine's depth between 250 and 400 feet, changed course frequently but gradually, and used temperature gradients in the water to hide from Japanese sonar. Shōkaku's death. At 13:32, peculiar noises began emanating from the direction of the torpedo attack. The sound operator described them as breaking up noises, the characteristic sound of a ship's hull collapsing under pressure. These continued intermittently for the next half hour. At 14:08, for tremendous explosions shook Cavalla despite the distance. These were not depth charges, but something far more powerful, likely the detonation of Shōkaku's ammunition magazines or aviation fuel bunkers. As Cavalla continued her evasion, the drama aboard Shōkaku reached its climax. The carrier's damage control efforts had initially shown promise, with crew managing to contain initial flooding and extinguish some fires. However, structural damage was too severe. Aviation gasoline vapors, heavier than air, accumulated in lower compartments despite ventilation efforts. At approximately 1,400, these vapors reached an ignition source, possibly a spark from damaged electrical equipment or hot metal from earlier fires. The resulting explosion tore through Shōkaku's interior, destroying what remained of her watertight integrity. The blast was so powerful it lifted the armored flight deck several feet, sending aircraft and crew members flying. Secondary explosions followed as ready ammunition for anti-aircraft guns cooked off in intense heat. Captain Matsubara, Hiroshi, ordered, "Abandon ship" at 14:10, but many crew were already trapped below decks by fire, flooding, or structural collapse. At 15:01, Shōkaku capsized to starboard and sank stern first. As she went down, more explosions erupted from within her hull. The carrier that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor participated in the Coral Sea battle and survived numerous engagements throughout the war, finally met her end in the Philippine Sea's depths. Of her crew of 1,663 officers and men, 1,272 perished, including Captain Matsubara, who chose to go down with his ship. Approximately 570 survivors were rescued by Japanese escorts, surfacing. By 1500, Cavalla's battery was approaching exhaustion, and air inside the submarine was barely breathable. Carbon dioxide levels had risen to dangerous levels, causing headaches and lethargy among the crew. Kossler made the decision to come to periscope depth, despite the possibility of enemy destroyers still searching. To his relief, the periscope revealed empty ocean in all directions. At 1900, after more than 7 hours submerged, Cavalla surfaced into tropical twilight. The crew immediately started diesel engines, bringing blessed fresh air into the fetid submarine. Men stumbled topside, gulping clean ocean air and cooling themselves in spray breaking over the bow. Kossler's first priority was to report the attack to Pearl Harbor. The radio operator transmitted, "Attacked Shōkaku-class carrier, 3 hits observed, heavy explosions heard after going deep. Believed target sank. Position 11 degrees, 50 minutes north, 137 degrees, 57 minutes east." The message was received with jubilation at submarine headquarters. Admiral Lockwood himself drafted the reply. "Well done, Cavalla!" Her achievement beyond expectations. Strategic impact. The strategic impact of Shōkaku's loss extended far beyond eliminating a single carrier, coming simultaneously with Taiho's loss to USS Albacore's torpedoes. The Japanese carrier force had lost 2 of its 3 fleet carriers in a single day. More critically, hundreds of aircraft and irreplaceable air crews were lost. Japanese naval aviation, already weakened by attrition, would never recover from losses suffered June 19, 1944, a day that would become known to American aviators as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The sinking of Shōkaku represented more than the loss of a single warship. It symbolized the complete reversal of fortune in the Pacific War. The carrier that had launched the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, participating in Japan's stunning early victories, had been destroyed by a submarine from the nation she had helped awaken to war. Legacy. Cavalla's success on her first war patrol established her as one of the most celebrated submarines in the Pacific Fleet. She would complete 5 more war patrols, sinking 3 additional Japanese vessels. Lieutenant Commander Kossler was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions, and Cavalla received the Presidential Unit Citation for her first patrol. The submarine's achievement must be understood within the broader context of the submarine war against Japan. American submarines, comprising less than 2% of the U.S. Navy's personnel, accounted for 55% of all Japanese maritime losses during the war. Tactical lessons from Cavalla's attack influenced submarine doctrine for the remainder of the war. Kossler's decision to report the enemy task force before attacking demonstrated the strategic value of submarines as scouts for the fleet. His patience in achieving optimal firing position became a textbook example of fire control technique. The location of Shōkaku's wreck remains unknown to this day. Unlike many other major warships from the Pacific War discovered by deep-sea exploration teams, Shōkaku's final resting place in the Philippine Sea has yet to be located. For families of the 1,272 men who went down with her, the lack of a known grave site remains a source of continuing grief. Cavalla herself survived the war and continued to serve the United States Navy in various capacities until 1969. She was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1982 and is now preserved as a museum ship at Seawolf Park in Galveston, Texas. Visitors can walk through her narrow compartments, peer through the periscope Kossler used to target Shōkaku, and stand in the control room, where life and death decisions were made in split seconds. Conclusion. The morning of June 19, 1944, had begun with the Imperial Japanese Navy launching what it hoped would be a decisive counterstrike against the American invasion of the Marianas. By sunset, that hope had been shattered, with 2 fleet carriers on the ocean floor and hundreds of aircraft destroyed. Among the many heroes of that day, the 72 men aboard USS Cavalla had played a pivotal role, demonstrating that in naval warfare, a single submarine with a determined crew could change history's course. As Herman Kossler would later reflect in his memoirs, the attack on Shōkaku was both the culmination of years of training and preparation, and a matter of being in the right place at the right time. But as Admiral Chester Nimitz observed, luck is frequently the reward of those who are prepared to take advantage of opportunities. Cavalla was prepared. The opportunity presented itself, and the result was one of the most significant submarine attacks of the Second World War.